Hello, and welcome to this presentation called First Steps in Clause Analysis, Finding the Subject. I'm guessing you have some interest in the English language. Maybe you're thinking about studying it on a university degree program or as part of a university degree program. Maybe you're just interested in English language and want to learn as much as you can about it. My name is Jodie, and I am fascinated by the English language. That's why I teach it at Sheffield Hallam University. And one of the things I enjoy knowing about the most is understanding the nitty-gritty of clauses. Once you've got your head around the clause, a whole world opens up to you. You can learn about the structure of conversations, the structure of stories, literary stories or just stories that people tell each other, things about interaction, the way information is organized, newspaper articles, all sorts of things. But sometimes people are a little daunted because the terminology around this type of grammatical analysis can be a little bit tricky. It's actually a lot easier than you'd think. We all know it already up here in our heads, which I'll talk about today. So today I just want to kind of give you a sense of how easy it is to access things like how to find the subject in a clause. So let's get going. Okay, so the English language and any language is composed up of all different types of components that are all arranged. They're all sort of hierarchically arranged. The smallest unit of language is the phoneme or the sound, and the largest unit is sometimes considered the sentence, although you could go even higher and say it's the text. But we're today going to specifically focus on something called the clause. What is a clause? Okay, so this is an excellent definition from Kim Ballard's book, but this is an example of how sometimes the terminology around English language can be trickier than it needs to be. So Ballard says a clause is a unit of syntactic structure larger than a phrase and normally containing an overt subject element, a verb element, and any verb complementation. Okay, so that might have caused a few question marks for you. And so that's what we want to do today, is maybe erase some of those question marks about what a clause actually is and what the elements are. The thing that we want to focus on today is the fact that if you're listening to this and you're understanding what I'm saying, you have a brain. And your brain is really, really smart. Look at how smart your brain is. It's already graduated from something. Your brain already knows how to find the two essential elements of a clause. So the two things that a clause has to have is something called a subject and something called a verb. Okay, so a simple example might be, I eat. Okay, so that's a clause. It has a subject, I, and a verb, eat. It can be much more elaborate than that, but at its very basic level, it needs to have a subject and a verb. Now, you don't need to worry about the subject and the verb of a clause because your brain already knows what they are. Okay, this is one of the things that fascinates me so much about English language is that your brain, by the time you were about the age of 3, and any of you who have children in your life who are around that age will be fascinated by the way that their brains already know how to structure and make sense of language. But you already have these mechanisms for understanding the structure of the language that you've learned as a child. And so what we want to do is access some of those. Okay, but the brain is telling us we're sticking to the subject today. So we're going to stick to finding the subject of a clause. And the way we do that, the way we access what our brain already knows, is we use something called probes. So it's a little bit like those machines where you try to, use the joystick to get the teddy bear out of the machine for you. You're using a probe to access the things that your brain already knows. And probes are designed to be simple, straightforward, intuitive ways to access particular components or structures of language. So what we'll be doing today is something called the question tag probe. I love the question tag probe. Now, a question tag, you might be familiar with what a question tag is already. It's also sometimes called a tag question. They're actually quite common in English usage. That if you work with me for a second, I just wrote this really silly, stupid story about boxes of chocolate. So look at this stupid, simple story with me. I can give Samira that box of chocolate. You bought it especially for her. She's going to be so excited. Her brother doesn't need to find out. Chocolate isn't his favorite thing anyway. You and I could try one. Those caramel ones look good. Okay, so that's my simple, stupid story. Now, any one of those are all actually, it's made out of clauses or sentences, but any one of those clauses could be a little bit more interactive, like I could be engaging my listener a bit more in the conversation. And one of the ways you can do that is by adding a question tag. So it could be, I can give Samira that box of chocolate, can't I? Right? So we can add a question tag for every single one of those clauses. You bought it especially for her, didn't you? She's going to be so excited, isn't she? Her brother doesn't need to find out, does he? Chocolate isn't his favorite thing anyway, is it? You and I could try one, couldn't we? Those caramel ones look good, don't they? Okay, so what we're doing is we're adding a question tag, and they add a little bit of an interactive element to it. So those of you who know a bit more about question tags have done probably some exploring around the different functions that question tags can have. But for us today, all we want to do is to be able to come up with question tags for clauses, because they form an important probe for us. Here are the actual question tags. So I pulled apart the question tags. Now the question tags do something really interesting. They're always made up of something called an auxiliary like can, sometimes a negative like und, but they're always made up of a pronoun at the end. So let's have a look at the pronouns. There they are. Can't I, didn't you, isn't she, does he, is it, couldn't we, don't they, right? All of those pronouns are actually called subject pronouns. Okay, so are you with me? Those subject pronouns are going to be like the key that finds us the subject of each of the clauses. So the beautiful thing about the question tag probe is that we can come up with a question tag for a clause, and it will produce a subject pronoun, and that subject pronoun helps us find the subject of the clause. How cool is that? Okay, so let's start with I can give Samira that box of chocolate, can't I? I is the subject pronoun. I is also the subject of the clause. How easy is that? Okay, let's look at you. You bought it especially for her, didn't you? Look at that. The subject pronoun in the tag is the same as the subject of the sentence or the clause. And it keeps going. She is going to be so excited, isn't she? The pronoun is she in the tag, and she is also the subject of the clause. Okay, look at this next one. Her brother doesn't need to find out, does he? Okay, so in this case, he isn't the subject of the clause, but we look to see what he replaces, and he replaces her brother. Okay, so we could say he doesn't need to find out rather than her brother, and the thing that the he replaces is the subject. And for those of you who know a little bit about subjects, here in this discussion, we're talking about the noun phrase, the entire noun phrase that makes up the subject, okay? So the noun phrase. The noun phrase that we could replace with he is her brother. What about the next one? Chocolate isn't his favorite thing anyway, is it? And it is our subject pronoun, and it replaces the word chocolate. Chocolate isn't his favorite thing anyway, it isn't his favorite thing anyway, and chocolate is the subject. You and I could try one, couldn't we? And we take the we and we say, okay, what does we replace? We replaces you and I. So you and I, that whole shebang, the whole thing is the subject. And those caramel ones look good, don't they? We've got they is our subject pronoun from the tag, and it replaces those caramel ones. And so we know that the subject of that clause is those caramel ones, right? So you actually know now how to use a question tag to find the subject of a sentence. So we're going to make it a little bit more complex now, but just keep in mind, you've just learned that in the last less than 10 minutes. So what we'll do now is I'll take you through a slightly more complicated one, and then I'm going to give you a list of sentences where you can try it on your own. You can pause the video and try it on your own, and then I'll take you back through them with the answer step by step. So let's start with this one about my extremely annoying younger sister, and we're just going to find the subject to this clause. My extremely annoying younger sister always gets her way. So we'll start with step one, which is when you have a clause, you add a question tag. So we're going to pretend that we're being a little bit more interactive with that clause. We're having a conversation with somebody. Maybe we want them to give us a response. So we say, my extremely annoying younger sister always gets her way, doesn't she? That's the first step, is you come up with a question tag for the clause, right? And that's the work your brain is doing that you don't even have to think about. If you're somebody who grew up in a world where question tags were normal, then question tag, your brain will already know how to make those. So you've got your question tag, and then the next thing you do is you find the pronoun in the tag. So it's the little word, there's only a few of them, and it's the last word in the tag, so doesn't she. We've got our pronoun, and then what we do is we go to step 3 and we find the noun phrase the pronoun refers to. And that's the whole phrase. So what does she refer to? Well, you could say, well, it refers to my sister, but we want to find the specific stretch of words in the clause. We want to be narrow in on the specific set of words in the clause that the she refers to. So here it would be, my extremely annoying younger sister always gets her way, doesn't she? And what we then do is we check our work. So we replace the noun phrase with the pronoun to see if it's still what we call well-formed. In other words, does it sound like a sentence in English, right? So we replace my extremely annoying younger sister with she. She always gets her way. And we realize, well, that's perfectly well-formed. We could imagine somebody saying that. That sounds grammatical in English. So everything that she replaced is the subject. My extremely annoying younger sister. And you can put a block box around that and you know I've found the subject. Okay, and it's the whole thing. Fantastic. So you did great on that. Now I'm going to give you a bunch more clauses. My neighbor's prized guinea pigs have found their way into my dad's vegetable patch. She will never understand the importance of a good pair of unicorn slippers. Despite all his protests, my cousin Mo really does enjoy looking after my chinchillas. After school, Lucy and I are going to the cinema, and Miriam's love of salted caramel gherkins has caused her to go up, in my opinion. Okay, so these get, in my opinion, more difficult as you go. So what I would recommend is maybe pause the video and see if you can find the subject using the steps that we just went through. Do the question tag, find the pronoun, see which noun phrase the pronoun replaces. And when you're done with that, you can come back and I'll take you through the steps again and you can check your work against what we've done. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay, so if you've done those, now we're coming back and we're checking to see how well you did. So I'd love to know how easy that was for you and how difficult it was, or if you had any questions about it, but hopefully those will get answered as we go. So we'll start with my neighbor's prized guinea pigs have found their way into my dad's vegetable patch, and we know that our first task is to add the question tag. So we're pretending that we're having a conversation and we want somebody to respond to us, you know, yes, that's true, yes, that's true. So we say, my neighbor's prized guinea pigs have found their way into my dad's vegetable patch, haven't they? So we add our question tag. And then our next step is to find the pronoun. So the pronoun is always the last word in the tag, so it's they. And then our next step is to find the noun phrase the pronoun refers to. And remember, it's got to be the whole phrase, the whole shebang. Okay, so it's my neighbor's prized guinea pigs. Okay, so chances are there you found the subject, but we're always going to just double check and make sure that we've got the right subject. We're going to do a little verification exercise. So we're going to check our work. So what we do is we replace the thing we think is the subject with the pronoun. So we'll replace my neighbor's prized guinea pig with they. They have found their way into my dad's vegetable patch. So that tells us that we're right because that sounds correct. We're checking our brain. Our brain says, no, that sounds right. That sounds like something you could say in English. That's grammatical. So we know we found the subject. Yeah, my neighbor's prized guinea pigs. Okay, and remember, it's the whole thing exactly as it's stated in the clause. So if you got that, you're doing great. If you didn't quite get it, hopefully you know a little bit more about where you went a little bit wrong or a little bit wobbly. We'll try this one now. She will never understand the importance of a good pair of unicorn slippers. So first thing we want to do is add the question tag, will she? She will never understand the importance of a good pair of unicorn slippers, will she? And then we look to the pronoun, last word in the tag, which is she. And then we see what she refers to. Now this one is actually quite easy, but it might have flummoxed you a little bit. Keep in mind, sometimes the subject is the subject pronoun, right? We saw that with the thing about the box of chocolates up above. So she will never understand the importance of a good pair of unicorn slippers. So she matches the pronoun, so she is the subject. And we don't even need to check it because it's already exactly the same. So we know we've got the subject as she. Okay. How about this one? Despite all his protests, my cousin Mo really does enjoy looking after my chinchillas. All right, so we add a question tag and we pretend that we're asking for confirmation from somebody. Despite all his protests, my cousin Mo really does enjoy looking after my chinchillas. Doesn't he? Right, so there's our question tag. We look for the pronoun, it's the last word in the question tag, which is he. And then we check to see which bit he refers to. So this one might have gotten you a little bit confused. Let's give this a try. So here we say it's my cousin Mo, right? We think that's the subject. Now we're going to check our work. So we'll replace my cousin Mo with the pronoun, and we'll check to see if it's grammatical. Despite all his protests, he really does enjoy looking after my chinchillas. That makes sense, so that's accurate. So my cousin Mo is the subject. Now, one thing that might have flummoxed you a little bit here, you might have had a slightly different answer. So let's see what you might have done. You might have had a look and said, okay, he is the pronoun in the question tag, and he is Mo, right? I know who he is. He is Mo. So you might have missed the my cousin bit. But here's where the checking your work is important, because if you replace Mo with he, right, so we're checking our work now, you get something that's a little bit off. Despite all his protests, my cousin, he really does enjoy looking after my chinchillas. So it's not quite grammatical. So we say, okay, that didn't quite work. What whole bit of language, what's the whole phrase that he needs to replace? And here we say, despite all his cousins, all his protests, my cousin Mo, he really does enjoy looking after my chinchillas. So that's the subject, the whole shebang, the whole phrase. And this is the reason why we check our work by actually replacing the subject, what we think is the subject, with the pronoun to see if it's still grammatical. After school, Lucy and I are going to the cinema, so we add our question tag. We went, we're looking for some confirmation, let's say. So after school, Lucy and I are going to the cinema, aren't we? So there's our question tag. We look for our pronoun, which is the last word in the tag, which is we. We look for the bit of the sentence that we refers to. So in this case, it's Lucy and I. And then we check our work. So we say, okay, can we replace Lucy and I with the pronoun? After school, we are going to the cinema. Well, that sounds perfectly grammatical, so that we can be pretty assured is correct. And it is. Lucy and I is the subject. And this one we can see, as with the previous one, the subject isn't always the first thing in the sentence. This is why we like to use the question tag, because it helps us find what our brain already knows. The brain knows where the subject is. Okay, this is the last one. I think this is the trickiest one, so if you got this one, fantastic, and if you didn't, don't worry. Miriam's love of salted caramel gherkins has caused her to go up, in my opinion. Now, to me, I think a tricky thing here might be finding the question tag. So sometimes you have to kind of switch your intonation around a little bit on this. So, Miriam's love of salted caramel gherkins has caused her to go up, in my opinion. Hasn't it? Okay, so this is the question tag there. Hasn't it? Miriam's love. It's not always massively easy to find that question tag, especially for slightly more elaborate clauses. But the question tag here is hasn't it? And this will make even more sense as we go through. So Miriam's love of salted caramel gherkins has caused her to go up, in my opinion, hasn't it? And we find the pronoun, which is it. And we check in the clause to see which bit it is referring to. And in this case, what is it referring to? And it's this whole shebang here, Miriam's love of salted caramel gherkins. And we say, okay, now let's do a test and see if that it can replace that whole noun phrase. So we give it a try. It has caused her to go up, in my opinion. And that works. That's perfectly grammatical. So we know that Miriam's love of salted caramel gherkins is indeed the subject of that clause. So if you got that one, that is absolutely phenomenal. You're already phenomenal for giving it a go. But if you got that one, that was a particularly tricky one, I think. And so if you were just wanting to follow along and to see what the sentences were with the subjects of all of them, this is your answer key. all of the subjects are underlined there. So if you got some of them, fantastic. If you got most of them, great. If you got some of them, wonderful. And if you didn't get any of them, then maybe it's worth maybe just giving it a try, or maybe relaxing into it a little bit, or just trusting the fact that your brain actually knows these things. Now, if you're not crazy about question tags, what's wrong with you? No, there's nothing wrong with you. For some people, question tags don't come as part of their everyday speech. So the question tag might not be the best probe for you. So if that ever happened, if you and I were ever in conversation, we'd find a different probe that would help you find the subject. There's always a probe that works with your particular way of learning language. And if it's not easy, then it isn't the right probe for you. Okay. I just wanted to thank you for listening to this presentation and for sharing with me a little bit the things I love about language. And I hope to join you again for future presentations. Thank you very much.